Morning, everybody. Thank you for attending this morning's webinar. My name is Bree Houston, and I am a form designer turned project manager here at Qdabra, and I'm very excited to present this topic to you today. I know that slow browser forms, especially in Office 365, have been kind of a sore spot for a lot of people. So this is a webinar that we've been working on for quite a few weeks now, trying to make our slow form as slow as possible, which is kind of hard with a demo form. But we've definitely come up with a solution that kind of conveys a lot of the pain points that people see in slow browser forms. All right, so everybody knows that turtle-ish feeling when you open a slow browser form, and it just seems to putter and putter, kind of like this turtle car here. It takes forever to load, and I think all of us can identify with the still working on it and how just very painful that little phrase can be sometimes when we're trying to quickly open an InfoPath form, fill out our data, and be on our way. So what makes browser forms slow, or I guess specifically browser forms? And this is kind of a side note, but your results are going to vary, but these are typically the things that we've identified as making your form slow. So data connections. And this really refers to the amount and when you query them. So if you have, more than 5 or 6 data connections and they all query whenever the form loads, your form's going to load very slowly. Data connections can take anywhere from optimally anywhere from 1 to 7 seconds to load individually. So if you're loading 5 or 6 of them at the same time on form load, that's going to slow your form down considerably. Another one to watch out for is long views. So this is if you have long repeating sections or you've designed your form with all of your fields and data in one view, you could get a very long view. And that simply means that you're maybe scrolling down a lot. And that's going to kind of create that slow rendering in the browser as well. Too many views, and that really relates to more of the weight of the form and how that can start to really slow down your performance. Large file attachments, and this is one that is kind of a little bit hidden. So as a rule, our InfoPath forms are a .cap file that contain many multiple files, and the attachments actually live in the InfoPath form itself when we attach files to the form. So that can create, again, a really big file that's having to load every time we open the form. Complicated calculated values. And this can be, any sort of calculations that are updating based on multiple changes in your form. Those are going to cause issues simply because the more complicated you get, the form has to kind of recalculate every time you change a value, and that can cause issues as well. Postbacks, which are both good and bad, they're kind of a necessary evil when it comes to browser forms. So postbacks essentially allow some of your data and actions to fire, especially when you are performing those calculations. But there's ways to kind of limit the amount of postbacks that you actually need in your form for those performance things. And many other things. You'll find as time goes on, the more that you can investigate and kind of pull things. Another kind of helpful tip is when you're creating new layout tables to not kind of copy and paste them from one view to the next. I've seen issues with that, not just in speed of load, but also rendering. And this is another kind of, I identify with this image, God over in the ditch, banging your head on the tree. Oh no, my form's so slow, what do I do? And how do I go from all of those things that are affecting my performance of my form and get it really optimized for the browser? So, tips and tricks. Start debugging, and this is a really scary thing for most people, but this is something we practice internally all the time. Publish your form to a different library. If you're worried that you're going to do something that you can't come back from in your form, publish it to a different library on the same site. Change, maybe one or two data connections, your submit data connection and the publish location, and then it's still going to be functioning just like it should to kind of perform all the things that you would want to look at in your form. Also save your latest version before you do anything to your local desktop, and then you have kind of a fallback if anything you do to the form really significantly changes it and you don't want that version out live on your site. And then start taking things out to find the sore spots. So a good place to start is with those data connections that query on load. And this is basically just to figure out what's making your form slow. You can disable all of them on form load, or you can kind of incrementally turn one off, turn one on, turn them all off, turn one of them on, and figure out, how long each one individually is taking so you can find the data connections that are taking the longest amount of time. Another place to look is on your form load rules, or if you're using queue rules, your finished loading rules, because if you have lots of logic that's firing again on that initial load of your form, the form could be performing slowly. So looking at all of those things and what is actually making your form slow on that load can be really helpful in the debug process. All right, so first demo of the day is going to be debugging a slow form. So I have two forms ready today. I have faster browsers form, my slow form. And here it is in the designer. You can see when I flip over to the fast form that the layout's pretty similar, but I already, without having any data in my form, have a pretty long view. So you can see that I have to scroll down through the view in the browser or in the designer. And now I'm going to show the form in the browser. Okay, so my slow form, and I'm going to start with a new form. So I have a timing device over on my side of things that I'm going to open up and time this first open. So hitting the start and the dreaded working on it. It's already been 5 seconds. 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 20, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. Ah, there we go. So you can see that this form was loading very, very slowly. And that's kind of the ill-performant form load that we were talking about. Your standard form load shouldn't take more than about 5 or 6 seconds on kind of the maximum. So as I go and I fill out this project's form, you can see that I have lots of drop-downs where I have external data and logic. You can see I'm filtering, and again, these postbacks and the way that my lists are set up with a filtering rule instead of cascading filters are causing some issues here. If I scroll down to my projects, you can see that it's not filtering the way that I would want it to. There. And we're going to add our estimate here. That's going to take some time. Oh. Okay. And that's not the error message that anybody wants to see. So let's try that again and see if this form will load a little bit faster. Still taking some time to load. There we go. So again, I'll choose, oh, there we go, it's tax season. And another thing to kind of watch out for is that dreaded postback limit. In SharePoint Online, it's about, I think it's 75. So the more that you're posting back to kind of force logic in your form, you could reach that limit. So I'm going to go ahead and try and add this section again. There we go. And you can see here, this is, my nested repeating section. And you can see that each time it flashes, I'm causing that post back. So I'm going to show you something that a lot of people encounter as well, because the post back, there's a number functioning behind each one of these. If I try and quickly click both of these checkboxes, you're going to see something kind of interesting. Oops. Oh, I didn't do it fast enough, so let's, there we go. Oh, let's try it over here. They're closer. There we go. So you can see that if you're trying to quickly click, that sometimes your actual click isn't happening before the post backfires and the field actually clears. So that's also not so good. And then I have this nice repeating attachment section, which can be really helpful if you have lots and lots of documents. But if I go and I attach multiple documents, well, you can see that it's going to take some time for my attachment to render here. Grab a couple. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and save this out and then close my form. Let's try and open that same one. Actually, I have a different one from yesterday that's a little bit larger. So this is really going to display that long view created by that nested repeating section. And you can see taking a considerable amount of time to load. Almost there. You can see the loading has even paused on this one. Okay, there we go. So long browser time. So what I'm going to do with this form is I'm going to pop back to the designer, to my slow form. And what I'm going to do is publish back out to the SharePoint server. And you can see that I'm using the same URL. And this essentially is going to become my test form. So instead of update, I'm going to create a new library. I'm going to call it slow form tester. Oops, I can't use exclamation marks. Okay, there we go. There we go, and just publish right back out. And since it lives on the same site, even if I didn't adjust my submit data connections, it would just submit to the library, which isn't a huge deal unless I start deleting nodes from my data source. Oh. Well, that's a new error. But essentially, I would publish this back out, just like so. And then let's go ahead and take a look at the data connections. So you can see here, on the summary, it gives you a little summary of what happens. So every time the form is opened, that data source is being queried, the second one, third one, fourth one. So that's already 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, So you can see lots and lots of data that I don't necessarily need to pull back into my form. So what's the difference between this form and the other form that I'm kind of allowing these queries to not function on load, even though I might need them not just the first time the form loads, but each subsequential load. So let's go and take a look back at the slide deck for a moment. Oops. There we go. So how do we make them faster? We're going to delay those data queries on load and only run the logic when we have to. So the way that I typically will do this is to hide the queries in the form. And by hiding the queries in the form, you can also make smaller views, you can hide items, and then storing big files in a separate library. So hiding the queries in the form and smaller views kind of go hand in hand, and that's going to be a large part of the next demo that I do. So demo is going to be this lightning fast form that we have over on the fast form side. So I'm going to, whoops, I don't want to duplicate my, there we go. Okay. Now I've got my fast and my slow. That's the slow form. Here's the fast form. So if we look at the data connections here, oh, and the other part that I use a lot is an external XML. So any list that you have on SharePoint that's not going to be updated very often, such as maybe a products list, maybe the billing quarters, the the questions, any of those things can live on an XML in the form rather than on a SharePoint list. And those are pretty simple and easy to create. I use Notepad++ for that specific item. And you can see I create this repeating structure with an opening and closing tag, and then each group that essentially lives in my XML is grouped together. And if you're ever wondering how to create this XML, you can actually just create a new InfoPath form. I'll do it right here, right now, because I know a lot of people don't want to touch things like Notepad++, and it's very intimidating. But I can very easily create one of those XMLs. If I create a repeating table and I just preview, you can see these aren't well named by any means, but it's going to get our point across. And we insert a few items. And I can just save that file out locally. To my documents. Close my preview. And now in the same form, I'm going to add a data connection to that XML. And you can see how easy it is. I'm going to add it to an XML document. I'm going to browse to my documents folder, grab that test XML. And those ones are all right to query on form load. So if we go and look at my test data now and preview, I've very quickly created an external XML that mimics those SharePoint lists. So a very quick and easy way to take your data from a SharePoint list and put it in an XML that you can use in your form. And then my other data connections, you can see that my project codes is now an XML, billing quarters is an XML. Products is still a SharePoint list, but I'm not querying it on load. So delaying my queries. Really, there's only a couple lists that I'm querying on load. So then if I go down to these tabs that you probably saw in the slow form, I'm actually using these tabs to hide and show different sections, but I'm also hiding my queries because by default, all of the sections are going to be hidden in the form on open if I clear out my section, and it's going to force my users to use these tabs to navigate in between different sections of the form and also query the data as I need it. You can see there, I'm querying data on some of my tabs. All right, so let's go take a look at the faster browser form. All right, and we'll go ahead and we'll time this one. And I'm going to hit New. And it's taking just a little bit longer with the GoToMeeting application because it consumes a lot of resources. But that one was about 12 seconds, so considerably slower from that first open. And you can see that I'm not showing any other parts of my form to start with. I've also moved these to a sequential query, so I'm actually querying my contacts list when a company is chosen. And you can see there's no longer that lingering kind of form load when I choose a contact because I'm not filtering the list itself. I'm creating a filtered query by setting the query value and then querying that list. And you saw almost no pause between my company selection and my contact selection. So let's go to our project tab now. And you can see just a little bit there. And if I go, and you can see that this is actually an XML data source now as well. And it loads much more quickly. I'm going to add my project estimate. Just a couple seconds to load on that one. And this no longer uses a complicated default value, but rather I have this calculate button that will allow me, you can see no post back there, my base cost, and then when I click the calculate, again, almost no pause between when I click the calculate button and my cost is added. So again, I can add several more. And again, that certain things are going to have to make a post back in your form. But we can eliminate things like these checkboxes and using buttons to kind of force our users to calculate. And then on the questions, you saw the attachment node before, and this is a technique using Q rules that will make your forms much more lightweight. And you could add as many attachments as you want. And what this specific thing is going to do, you see this upload attachment button now, is I'm going to upload my attachment to an external library and replace it with a link. So now I can open that link to open my file, but the form has become more lightweight. So I'll go ahead and save and close. And I believe it's still opening in our slow library. Yes, that was my bad on adjusting that data connection. But when we open up that form again, you're going to see a much faster rendering of the form. And I know we do have some questions, so I'm going to wait till the very end, and then I will revisit all of those things. And just to wrap things up, there we go. So as kind of our conclusion, no one likes slow forms. So use your best detective skills to identify what's making your form slow and then take action. So trying to move from many postbacks, many data connections and queries to kind of those lower amounts, dispersing them through your user experience, and then making condensed views are all things that are going to speed up your form. Kind of like that Ferrari, a little bit faster than our turtle car at the start. And I will move to answer some questions now. Let's see. Oops, I gotta expand my questions. There we go. So let's see if I can pop this out. There we go. Yeah, glad you guys like the XML tip. XML can be a really scary thing to create if you've never done it before, but you can actually do it in a fairly quick and easy way. Um, Okay, if you include lists that don't change very often as an XML in the form, how do you handle when the changes need to be made? You have to manually do it, as I assume someone has to tell you that the form doesn't contain my value, which could be a problem if they can't fill out the form until it's updated. Yeah, that can and can't be a problem. You can also, if you save that template that you created your XML with, you can actually preview your template with that XML and add to it and save it again. So that should be, no more than a 5-minute process to recreate the XML and reattach it to your form. You can also create a reference to the XML from a resource file, which is related to our webinar about being able to create an external data-driven survey. It's using that same technique where you create basically a config file and publish it out to a SharePoint site and create that instance with your XML reference and then pull it into the form from its published location. So Stacy, that's another way that you can kind of use that same technique if it would be a blocking issue for your user. Can you review how you uploaded the attachment and it created a link to the attachment in another library? A link to the attachment in another. Ah, yes. Okay, so here, and that is done all in QRules. So if we go into our form, and again, the webinar package today is going to include the 7.1 trial of QRules in both the fast form and the slow form, and the STPs for you to give this a try, publish it out to your site. So it'd be a good way to kind of investigate how this method actually works. But we're using this upload attachments button here, and we're using a command called save to SharePoint. And what this does is essentially pushes the XPath of our file out to the URL included in the rule here, which is the URL to, let me find my library here, my URL to my Fast Forms document library. And you can see that trial added 4 minutes ago that I could download. Since it's XSN, it's not going to open in the browser unless I publish it to a site. But essentially it pushes that file out to this document library and then replaces the file in the form with a link. So it's a pretty cool technique to make your forms more lightweight. Deleting attachments. There's actually a specific command to then delete that is kind of the opposing to the save to SharePoint. You can delete from SharePoint as well because we have that source URL. And that was kind of both of those questions. Are there any other questions from the audience? Those were all very, very good questions. All right, and I just have a quick little wrap-up slide here. Whoops. All right, so our upcoming webinars, send form attachments with email. So there'll be a little bit more on QRules 7.1. And that basically covers how you can send emails using QRules in a filler form. And Greg has one more question about uploading attachment to an email and sending. That is not something that we have done yet in QRules or any other way, but it might be worth investigating in the next release of QRules. So thanks, Greg, for that little piece there. All right, and then if you fill out the webinar survey today, you'll get all the webinar swag, including both templates injected with the trial of 7.1. And my challenge to the audience is, can you make the slower form even slower than it is? I would love to see a super slow form. It's going to include the STPs to recreate the scenario, and if you're interested in how to use an STP, MSDS has a really great article about how to use STP to create those lists on your site. and the slide deck. So those are all the wonderful things that are going to be included in today's webinar. It looks like we have maybe one or two more questions. I saw a hand raise. Maybe not. Let's see. It's basically the STP is a template file for the list, and you can include the data from your list. It's really helpful if you're ever wanting to recreate a situation from one site to the next. You can export your SharePoint list as STP and then create a new. And maybe I'll save that for another webinar, or I could quickly show you today for the audience members who are still with us. So an STP file, if I go to one of my SharePoint lists, let's go to our products. That's a pretty big list there. And this is something that you can do in the list settings. And you see this option to save a list as a template. I'm going to call it products test. And I'll call it. And I want to include the content. And I just simply hit OK. And I can go to my list template gallery. And I should see my products. Whoops. Where did it go? Oh, there we go. Products test. And I can download. Let's see, where's my download button? Ah, there we go. Download a copy. Save it locally. And then go to somewhere like our parent site. And under my site settings, you see list templates in the Web Designer Gallery. So you will need to be a site collection admin for this feature. And files, upload a document, browse to that location where I downloaded my STP. Which should be in here. There we go. Click OK. And save. Ah, thank you, Tom. Tom just noted that you have to enable scripts to run if you're using SharePoint Online, which is true in this case. So now if I went to my site contents, and I'm going to add an app to add that list. And what I should see here in my list of apps that I can add is our products test. And it might take me, there we go. So just like that, I can even rename it, and then it creates that new list with all of the contents on my SharePoint site, and it might take a moment. And there we go, and there's all of our data. So a great kind of sidetrack to end the webinar today, but thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you you got some great tips and tricks from today's webinar. Any lasting questions before we split off? I know there was lots of things today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email support@qdabra.com if you want any more tips and tricks related to today's webinar. Thank you.